So let's look at an example of creating a class level generic in Java. So I've got our Hello World project open, and we've got our printer class here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pretend like we want to make printer be able to have a type of print cartridge. So we want to have different types of printers. What we don't want to have to do is to re-implement printer and make a printer called black and white printer and another printer called color printer. Instead, it'd be nice if we had a generic printer class and we specified when we created our printer whether we wanted it to be a black and white printer or a color printer, and then we could pass in to our constructor the print cartridge, and we could pass in a black and white print cartridge or a color print cartridge. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're just going to take our class definition of printer and we're going to change this so that it takes a type T. And this is going to be the type of printer. That it'll be either black and white or color or whatever kind of cartridge that we could come up with. And we'll see some ways to restrict this later and why we'll want to. But for now, it'll actually take any kind of type, any type basically in Java besides a primitive type. So what we're going to do here is we want to hold a reference to whatever this type is. So we're going to use this. This is basically our mystery type, and we can use this everywhere where we would declare the type. So in this example, we're going to want to pass in this type into the constructor so that we can store an instance of this type. We're going to, in this case, store our print cartridge. So we'll call this cartridge, because we're going to store a cartridge. And then we need to have a class level variable here. So I'm going to make a private of type T, and I'm going to call this cartridge. Now you notice this type T here is the same as this T and this T. So whatever type is going to get filled in here. So for example, let's say we had a color cartridge. Then T would be represent color cartridge, and this is just like replacing color cartridge here and color cartridge here and color cartridge here. So let's assign this variable. We'll do this dot cartridge equals cartridge. And so now we're storing a reference to whatever cartridge gets passed in. So let's look at the syntax real quick of how we would actually use this. So I'll go to our main program here, and let's change this a little bit. We had our machine example in here. Let's go to printer, and in fact, let's just declare this as a new printer here. So when we declare our printer type, we use these angle brackets to say what the type will be. And in this case, we're going to do something like a color cartridge. We haven't declared this type yet, but this is a type that we could use here, and we'll call this printer. And then when we do our new printer, we do the same thing here. We say this is also type of color cartridge, or printer of type color cartridge. So this printer is going to take color cartridges, and then in our constructor we're going to pass in, we're going to need to create a new color cartridge. And so you can see here, this is the kind of syntax that we're going to use here. We still need to create a class called color cartridge, but you can see that in order to use a generic class, we have to specify what the type is. Because remember, in our class here, it's of type T. We don't know what T is. So when we actually use the class, we're specifying what the type is. And then that type is going to basically represent T for this instance of the class. Remember the difference between a class and an object. This object is going to get created and it has a type known. The class is generic. The class doesn't know what the type is until you create an instance of the object, and then it has the type defined here, this color cartridge in this example. So let's go ahead and create some classes that we'll be able to use here. I'm going to create two classes. I'm going to create a color cartridge, and then I'll create a black and white cartridge. And so now you can see our printer class, we've set this up to use the cartridge, and in our main here we need to just import this color cartridge. And so we've got our import color cartridge type. So this compiles, this is fine here. I'm going to get rid of the machine references here. Now let's actually use this, and this is going to have a little bit of a limited use right now until we find a good way to use it. So we'll go into our printer class, And what we're going to do here is we're going to use this cartridge, and we're just going to use this in a very simple way. When we call our print method here, if you remember this print method that prints a number of copies, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to print out a toString on our cartridge. And this isn't going to really do much for us here, but just to take a look here, I'll do this print line, and we can look at our cartridge, and you can see the methods we can call on this. Not much. We can only call methods that exist in object, since all types inherit from object. That's because our class has no way of knowing what type this is or what methods could exist on cartridge. So we're going to just use this toString method here, since all types, all objects have toString. And we're going to override toString in our color cartridge. So I'll go into color cartridge, and if you remember how to do an override, we're going to do an override for public string toString. And toString is just a method that all classes have by default, because object has it, that puts out a string. Usually you could override this to provide a string representation of your class. So we're going to return, for this, we're going to return color. So now if we call this, whatever cartridge we get in, we're going to call the toString on it. And I'll do the same thing for the black and white cartridge. And here we'll return black and white. And so now let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to do here in our main class here. We're going to create a printer of type color cartridge, and then we're going to pass in a new color cartridge into our constructor. So now we've got a reference to our color cartridge. Then in our printer, we're going to print out whatever the cartridge was. We're going to print out its string, the toString on it. So let's go ahead and call our copy. Call printer.print, and we'll print one copy. Let's see what we get here. So you can see here we've printed out color and then the load more paper from before. Now if I change this, I could change this to a type of BW cartridge, and I can put BW cartridge here. So now we've got a black and white cartridge. If I run this, you can see it's printed BW for black and white. Now typically we would do more with our type here, but in this case we're making it so that we can have a printer that accepts multiple types. It can be typed when we create our printer. And the funny thing that you'll find here is this isn't really useful yet. Now if we were creating some kind of collection where we're holding a lot of different cartridges and they all needed to be the same type, and we kept on adding them to the printer and then getting them back out, then this would be useful using generics here. But what you'll find is as we restrict the generics, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a little bit here, then we'll actually be able to get some real good use out of this. And the reason why we're not able to get much out of this yet is because we can only call so many methods on the cartridge. We can only call the methods that are common to object.